Welcome to the Social Priority Podcast. I'm your host, StarPanda, and today on the itinerary, content creation and social issues. With me today is Vera Wild of Council of Geeks, the YouTube channel. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I kind of have to say, grading on the curve of world events. It used to be I'm doing all right grading on the curve of the pandemic, but now it's just like everything. So,
Yeah, after the pandemic, it was kind of like one thing after another, and it just won't
you
stop.
say after the pandemic as if it's
I
over.
mean,
So
true.
I mean,
yeah.
that alone.
So how did you get started talking about the media and entertainment on YouTube?
Well, in a way, a little bit as a fallback. The Council of Geeks YouTube channel, when it first started, it was a vehicle for scripted shorts, was initially what I did.
Oh.
And they were still geek centric, but it was scripted and they were kind of jokey and they were these characters, arguing about geeky stuff. And that's what it started out as. The very first time I started just sitting in front of the character and sort of rambling by myself, was actually intended just to be filler material between quote unquote seasons of the scripted stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But then between how long it was taking me to get, new scripts written and how much work, trying to shoot and edit those things were, I just transitioned over to rambling about geeky stuff. And my natural inclination is to talk, Star Wars, Doctor Who, superhero stuff, and a few other things as they come up. But the longer that I went on doing that, obviously that conversation broadened until eventually started encompassing just, general tropes that recur in media, often usually using geeky examples to illustrate it, and eventually talking about the people and the entities behind entertainment, because I could only go so long without kind of dealing with all that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So how have things been since you came out on YouTube?
Okay, I'm glad you specified on YouTube, because when people ask me when did you come out, I have to be like, which time? Because there's coming out to your immediate circle, there's coming out to your friends, there's coming out at your work, there's coming out on social media. It's a continuous freaking thing. It's funny. I came out on Council of Geeks in January of 2018, so about 4.5 years ago now. And at the time, like, I had done it partially, honestly, a little bit out of fear, because that was the point when the Council of Geeks channel had more subscribers than the Vera Wild channel did. Because I'd actually been doing the Vera Wild channel for longer, though that doesn't get updated very often these days. But once the Council of Geeks had more subscribers, I realized it was becoming an increasing likelihood that somebody was going to put two and two together, and realize it was the same person behind both. And part of the reason for coming out was to be sure that no one said it before I did. Because if I waited too long and I came out basically as a response of somebody else noticing, then it looks like I was ashamed. And it looks like something I was hiding. I've never been ashamed of myself. I've spent a very long time trying to figure out what the hell's going on with me, but I've never been ashamed. And so I came out in January of 2018, and gradually, I've just at this point, my default presentation is feminine to a pretty high degree. Because at the time I came out, like, I wasn't on any kind of hormone regimen, and I didn't think I would want to present feminine that often. But then I started to do it just when I would talk about LGBTQIA plus issues in entertainment, and then I just eventually went, screw it, I can just look like this whenever I feel like looking like this, and I'm at a point in my life. This is how I prefer to look. So
yeah,
it started out as a big deal. Like, it wasn't really an announcement. I kind of tacked it on at the very end of a Q&A video. But I came out there and I was kind of like, this is a thing about me. Don't worry about it though. And then I would bring it up when talking about queer issues, being like, this is why this is relevant to me. And eventually it was like, why is this an occasional thing? Because I used to wear a flat cap. I used to have, I still have. I don't wear them very often though. I used to have more sort of gender neutral glasses frames. And eventually all that just kind of fell away. It was like, I don't need this anymore. So now I'm just there and I'm me, and it's been that way for a while, and it's one less thing to have to worry about.
Do you feel it's liberating?
Yeah. Well, honestly, liberating might be an overstatement. At this point, it's just relaxing.
Fair.
Early on, liberating might have been a better word, but at this point, I've been doing it long enough that it's just like, well, look, to not just present as myself is extra work. So it's not burdening myself is all that it is at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was actually myself when I first started my channel. I was thinking about whether or not I wanted to be out right away. And then in the first episode, I just came out right away. Because the topic came up. So I was like, okay, I'll just say this. And then I was
there you go.
Yeah. So switching to, let's say, your it's the way you create content, I guess. Do you usually write a script, or is it usually off the cuff?
I would say it's stuff at this point. Well, talking about Council of Geeks, because I have a secondary channel at this point, Break Room of Geeks, which is where most of my review content goes at this point. That's unscripted. So setting that aside and keeping it on Council of Geeks, I'd say it's about 60% unscripted mostly, and about 40% scripted. And even that's a little fuzzy, because I'll have some things where I will have bullet points figured out and I'll have notes, but not a full script. Generally, if I do a full script, it's because the topic, for one reason or another, requires me to be very precise with my words, either because I'm going to be pulling a lot of quotes, or I'm talking about a sensitive subject where I want to pick my words carefully. And I don't want to risk saying something stupid because I'm going off the cuff. Or on random occasions where I've done stuff where I've done a lot of number crunching. I need a script for that. So a script is not my default. I'm very comfortable talking off the cuff. And I've been doing it long enough that I don't end up with too much stuff that I can't use doing that. But every now and then it's like, okay, I need to be careful with this one. This needs a script.
So first of all, what is your overall process of writing and presenting and making videos?
So I have a docket. I have an Excel sheet that's my planned videos. And that actually, give me a second, I can pull it up. And I've got videos planned out into the start of next year.
Oh, geez.
Not for every single week. Some of them I'd say I've got stuff planned for every week through October currently. But that's also liable to move around. So that plan is just a template. And the things that are on it, it's a mix of, the stuff that's planned further out is not particularly topical stuff. It can't be. That's why it's so far out.
Right.
So that's stuff that could be like, say, Doctor Who lists, or a deep dive into a movie that is not a current or topical movie. So like, it doesn't matter if I do it now or do it later, or maybe something that is seasonal. Like I'm hoping to put together a video on banned books in September, which is banned book month. So things like that. But that's also all the stuff that can and will get moved around as topical stuff basically just latches into my brain, whether it be, breaking news about newly announced projects, more commonly these days, breaking news about somebody attached to geeky properties being a horrible human being.
Yeah.
And I got to deal with that. Or just something that struck my fancy and like stuck in my mind, and I want to kind of I have ADHD, so like when inspiration hits, I know that if it's possible, it's in my best interest to grab it while I have it and run with it rather than just put it on the back burner, because some of the stuff that's like planned out for later months has been getting pushed back for over a year. Because other stuff comes forward, and honestly, I probably should have grabbed my interest in it earlier on. But so like, for example, I had a video that I did this past week talking about Marvel Phase 4, because I had, Ms. Marvel just wrapped up, and I'd seen Thor Love and Thunder, and I had enough thoughts about it overall to talk about that. I have a video coming out actually the Saturday after we talking about how the X-Men might get introduced into the MCU, because they've started hinting at that. So again, the stuff that just comes up and happens will rearrange my quote-unquote planned schedule, but the planned schedule is built with the intention that most of this stuff can and will be moved.
Mm-hmm. So where do you think the social issues start coming in?
So there are a couple of ways in which they came in. Sort of the big one for me was this was also in 2018, I think. I hit a breaking point. I think it was actually because of Disney's Beauty and the Beast live action movie. Which I didn't see, but I knew about. There had been all this buildup about LeFou and how there was going to be a quote unquote exclusively gay moment, which in the end just amounted to some, LeFou dancing with a man for all of 2 seconds on screen.
Yeah, that was a bit underwhelming.
Well, honestly, it was insulting.
Yeah.
When I found out how minor it was, I wasn't disappointed. I was insulted. And I made a very passionate video, not only calling out that, but calling out a lot of stuff like that. Because also at the time, because this was before we knew what a TERF J.K. Rowling was, I brought up Dumbledore and saying, you claim he's gay, frickin' prove it. Or basically calling out both creators and entertainment companies for claiming to have diversity when there's no evidence of it on screen. Yeah. So I called out a lot of stuff. I called out Dumbledore. I called out LeFou. I called out Wonder Woman, because I forget who it was. Might have been Grant Morrison. I'm not sure if it was them. But like somebody had said recently, well, obviously Diana is bisexual because she was on that island with all these women. I'm like, then frickin' show it. Because the way you've chosen to show it is that ever since she got off that island, she's just been with guys. That to me says if she was ever with women, it's because she had no other option. So if you honestly are going to claim she's queer, you better freaking show it at some point. And I went off on a whole bunch of these. And that first video was just, I was angry. I had hit a breaking point. And that kind of broke the seal on the idea of talking about this stuff. Now, still filtering it through, the kinds of media I'm passionate about, geeky material. But that was the one that really kind of broke the seal on it. And then as I got I started to become more noted within sort of the WhoTube, the Doctor Who YouTube community. I found myself feeling the need to address some of the nonsense I was starting to see go on in that fandom. And I remember at the time specifically, it was series 10, which was Peter Capaldi's last series as the 12th Doctor. And the companion was Bill Potts, who was a fantastic companion. She's a great character, wonderfully played. And Pearl Mackie I got to meet at Gallifrey 1, and she's lovely. But there were all these complaints like, oh, she goes on and on and on about being gay all the time. And I was just like, no, she doesn't. Not any more than all the straight people talk about, all the straight women go, oh boy, here's my boyfriend, or that guy's hot. It's the same thing. Mm-hmm. And just wanting to poke at the hypocrisy of it. And the longer that I've been doing this, the more, well, actually, the less patience I have. I'm 40 years old at this point. I'm kind of done waiting. If you're going to do it, then do it. And if you're not going to do it, stop hinting that you might. And that's just where I'm at as a person.
I mean, that makes sense, yeah. Why do you think so many nerdy fans of like these media franchises that we love don't really see all the political stuff that's in it?
Well, because not all, but the vast majority of fans who are the most vocal about, stop making it political or whatever, are cis straight white guys. Basically, they're the people who had the option to not see the politics. Their lives can be lived apolitically. But if you are a person of color, or if, right now, just flat out, if you are a person with a uterus, or if you're trans, or if you're queer, your very existence is already political. Mm-hmm. Because people can and do run political campaigns on the idea that your rights should be taken away. And if you're a straight cis white guy, that doesn't happen to you. And since you can live apolitically, you also have the ability to enjoy entertainment apolitically. And understand that part of the reason that I feel like I'm able to recognize this is that I used to think I was a cis dude. I did for a while. So, I understand the mindset, at least to a certain degree. And when all this stuff that you have previously been permitted to not think about if you didn't feel like it. And I'm not going to say most fans, the ones now currently complaining were the types who chose not to deal with it. They could watch something like Star Wars and ignore the fact that it is a political movie inspired by the Vietnam War and the rebels are not the American side of that war. They could ignore that. That could be an undercurrent. They didn't have to know that. They didn't have to contend with that. But as media started to evolve, and as minority creators started to finally have a voice, and capitalism being the way it is, as corporations started to realize that minority audiences also had money, then the material that was easy to ignore before, but has still always been there, starts being moved more to the front in a way that these guys can't ignore it anymore. And to them, that means it's changed. To them, that means it's different. But part of it is also honestly nostalgia. So I mentioned something like Star Wars. When you have a love of something that you gained that love earlier than you could ever have understood that there even was a political dimension to it, then your nostalgia is apolitical. But there still was politics to the thing. And that was true then, that's true now. But now that you're an adult and you recognize the politics, it feels like an intrusion. Even though they've always been there, you just didn't recognize it, whether it's because you were too young to notice or you simply had the privilege to not pay attention to it. people they don't like having the option to ignore things taken away.
Yeah.
Especially if you're privileged, kind of the greatest privilege of all is the right to ignore what's going on.
Yeah, I felt like I was watching one of your videos. Yeah, it's that you are really good at that stream of consciousness, huh?
I've been doing it for a while, yeah.
Do you often feel obligated to talk about certain issues?
Sometimes. It I'd say like there's definitely been occasion, and it happens more lately, that there are things that I would really rather not talk about. But because it's in my wheelhouse, it becomes a statement in and of itself to not talk about it.
Yeah.
So something that I felt that with has been all the stuff going on with Ezra Miller. I would really love to never talk about Ezra Miller. Unfortunately, years before set the precedent of, there's this messy thing going on with this person involved in geeky media. And for people who don't watch my stuff, I actually never approached this straight from a drama channel perspective. I have minimal interest in what these people did, whether it be Ezra Miller or Joss Whedon or Gina Carano or anyone else. That's not to say that what they did doesn't matter. It does, but that's not the perspective I like to come at it from. I actually prefer to come at it from almost like a PR perspective. Like, from the perspective of the people managing this property, what do you do now? Which has the benefit of allowing me to have a little bit more distance from what it is they actually do. But yeah, I would love to have never talked about Ezra Miller, especially with the latest round of stuff going on. But I talked about them in specific before, and even prior to that, I'd set that precedent. I talked about Amber Heard. I talked about Gina Carano. I talked about James Gunn. So choosing to ignore Ezra Miller, if I never talked about it, I knew the first thing I'd be accused of was glossing over or making excuses because they're non-binary.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I got accused of that anyways, even though I did address all the stuff and made it very clear I was not defending them in any way, shape, or form. I still got accused of that. But there would have actually been some validity to that accusation if I ignored what was going on. So stuff like that can come up where something will happen and I'll look at it and go, God damn it, I need to talk about that, don't I? And that's not the most fun stuff to make. Although what I always tell myself is, well, the thing you'd already planned and made for this week, you move it back a week, you deal with this, you put it out on a quick turnaround, and hey, you're a week ahead now. So that's I have to kind of filter it through work to not get too bummed out by it.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, you answered all my questions. So
see, this is what you get when you get a rambling person with ADHD. You let me talk long enough, I'm probably going to cover everything.
I mean, that's what people in this kind of industry kind of do. Like, if you let them go on, they'll just answer all your questions for you, and that's been the case for like the last few interviews I've done. So
I'm not shocked. I am not shocked to hear that.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to say on, or anything in particular you want to touch on?
I mean, I just feel like it's worth pointing out that I love my job. As much as I can and do complain sometimes about the pains of involved in what it is I do. Like, I love that I do this for a living. I worked a sales job for 9 years prior to this. I was laid off in 2020, and it was one of the best things that happened to me for a long time at all. It was definitely the best thing to ever happen to me professionally. Because I hated that job. I really did. And no matter what stress I have doing what I do now, because it's not stress free, but the stress that's involved, I will take it every day of the week happily rather than go back to the kind of work I was doing.
Yeah, I definitely feel that way. Although I'm still doing the work I've been doing. And
so did I for a long time. Like I've been on YouTube. I'm coming up on my 10-year anniversary.
Ooh.
Of having this channel. And you know, I as I said, I had that job for 9 years. So I was doing a full-time job and also this at the same time for a very long time. So I get it. But, you know, having something that you love, even if you've turned it into a side hustle, or your primary source of income, remembering that you love it is important.
We can move on to the current events if you would like.
Sure. Sure, let's go ahead.
So, there are, or rather, there have been a lot of things happening with the police lately. Specifically, talking about the shootings all over the country. The number growing more and more, very, just not a good story. But, so, like, we're seeing over and over, like with Uvalde and recently, I forgot if it was Greenwich or I forgot what the town was called, but, like, there were several areas where the police just didn't do their job properly. I believe in one of the recent ones, the police weren't the ones to stop the shooter. I might need to go look up the story, but
I saw that. I forget where it was.
Yeah, they called it a Good Samaritan had stopped the shooter.
Here's the funny thing. Here's the first thing that's worth noting. It's already, unless there's a major upheaval in court proceedings, it's already been a settled thing that police are not required to enter a dangerous situation.
Right.
But the thing is, most people assume they are. Most people think that if the police are aware of something happening, they have to help. They don't.
Yeah.
What's terrifying to me about the police, and I say this as a white person, so, like, I've been very fortunate to not have a major run-in with the police, but societally, we have simultaneously put an immense amount of power into the hands of police and expectation, with almost no oversight and almost no accountability. And it's what's really frustrating about it is, and this is part of why I'm really annoyed that, you know, the movement to defund the police seems to have lost momentum. Fantastic idea if you actually understand what defund the police means. Mm-hmm. Now, idiots and assholes will tell you that it means there are no cops anymore. That's not what it means. It means we have already defunded tons of social programs and other safety nets, and instead given that money to cops who are trained to go in with a gun. And so that when someone is having a mental health crisis, it's the cops who get called. When there is just a basic neighbor dispute, the cops get called. Instead of having any step between, hey, something seems a little off and a guy with a gun shows up. We've eliminated all the possible intermediary steps and taken the money that used to go to things like social services and pumped it into the police. That money needs to come back out of the police and go back into other services, into mental health services, into social services. Because frankly, even if you love the police, even if you think the police are great, we ask them to do far too much that is not what they are meant to be doing.
Absolutely.
And even most cops will tell you that what they are asked to do societally is not what they signed up for. That's not what they thought the job was, but it's what we expect of them. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is things like Uvalde make it clear that even the job that we do expect of them, they are not very good or reliable at. So we've empowered them, or at very least defaulted to them, all this other stuff that they're not even trained to do, and they can barely do the thing that they are trained to do. And the funny thing is, again, I think while shootings, I think probably statistically have gotten worse, I actually don't know the numbers on that. But the thing is, what's funny to me is to go back and look at older media with a completely different perspective on the police. So like right now, I have a podcast project going with my friend Jesse Gender. We're watching Babylon 5. I don't know if you've ever seen that show.
I don't think I have.
It's very good. I hadn't seen it before. That's the whole. It's a rewatch for her. It's my first time watching it, and it's a sci-fi show. It's set on a space station, and there's a character who's the head of security, a guy named Garibaldi, and it's funny watching this thing made in the mid '90s and seeing all these situations where Garibaldi is being put in, and his role as basically a cop is played in a way that just makes me uncomfortable. Like this assumption of he's right, or this assumption of, oh, it's okay when he clearly abuses power or wants to bend the rules. Going back and watching older stuff and seeing that reinforced idea of, the rogue cop out for justice. It's even beyond just the flat out political reality of the police. Societally, we have been very much conditioned by entertainment, even fantastical science fiction entertainment, to assume correctness in the authority of cops and to often paint any oversight on cops as the villains. Like, how many cop movies have internal affairs, flat out bad guys, but like they're a problem? They muck things up. They stop you from getting the hard work done when the hard work is beating up somebody until they confess to a crime they may or may not have committed.
Yeah.
So it's a very weird thing to go back and watch episodes. Like there's one, we're still in the first season. There's one where there's basically a union action. There's a strike, and it's an illegal strike. But, if the law is built in such a way that strikes are illegal, I would say something's already very screwed up. But it's an illegal strike, and Garibaldi goes in there, with his other cops. And technically, one of the strikers throws the first punch at the cops, but at the same time, like, you marched into their faces with weapons. I would say that you enacted violence initially, and at the end of it, it's treated almost like a good-natured skirmish, and I'm like, that's kind of gross. And I want people to understand, I'm not like saying that the show was secretly pro-cop and was pushing an agenda, or that J. Michael Straczynski, who was the writer of almost every episode, like had a secret pro-cop agenda. But like, this is just how marinated in this perspective we are, that it just seeps into everything. And if we don't examine it, it goes unchallenged, and at best stays the same, and at worst just deepens.
Yeah. I kind of wonder, like, how many of these cop shows that we had, like NCIS and CSI and all that stuff, like how much of that would be very wrong looking in today's like view?
I suspect a lot of it. Like I used to like Law and Order a lot, actually. And I'm not sure how comfortable I'd be going back and rewatching that. I suspect most of the district attorney stuff probably be okay, because Jack McCoy is like the best district attorney any fictional show will ever have. But I can think back on the cops and the way they threaten people. And how casually they say they'll book somebody on trumped up charges and tell them how badly they're going to get beat in prison, and not thinking anything of it at the time, and thinking back on it now and going, that the fact that they can just do that, and even if that's not reflective of reality, which by most indications it is, but even if it's not, the fact that that's in there and is never questioned already says something kind of messed up about societally how we perceive the police and assume the righteousness of the police simply because of what they are in theory supposed to be. Because I will agree with the fundamental on paper nature of what the police are supposed to be. I have massive problems with the reality of what the police are. So I think that's another thing that a lot of, sort of all blue lives matter kind of people tend to fail to get, is that my problem isn't with the fundamental idea of what police are meant to be. It's what they have become and what we've allowed them to be. And there's this very sad perception that any desire to shift the direction or to soften their impact is to just reject police. And like, what it reminds me of? It reminds me of when the U.S. went into Iraq, and suddenly it was, if you thought it was a bad idea, if you thought the invasion was a bad idea, you were against the troops.
Yeah.
I'm like, no. Like, I can be against what the police do currently and what they are allowed to do and what the system lets them get away with. That does not mean I personally hate every cop. That's largely because I don't personally know every cop. I have a strong suspicion I wouldn't like most of them. But, there's this line that's assumed that you have jumped over by expressing any criticism, any concerns at all. There's this generic pushback of shut up and just let them do their job. Like, well, the way they do their job is getting people killed, either directly or by inaction. So, maybe they shouldn't be allowed to just do their job, at least not the way they're doing it.
I think that's a major problem today. Like, there are so many people who defend like their favorite, even like media personalities and even authority figures. They'll defend them saying things like why are you questioning what they're doing? Like, it's their job, not yours, and stuff like that. Like, we can't even question an authority figure and question, like, are they really doing this right? Like, they're just supposed to be the arbiters of all this.
We're in a very all or nothing situation, sort of socially, right now. And it's not that hard to see how we got here, because in a lot of ways, I'm not going to say it doesn't happen on the left, but the right has kind of pushed the division very, very hard, because what especially the far right has learned is that they can pull the center right more in their direction, because center right people will go far right before they will go left of center.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's reached a point where people, and this is not all people on the right, this is not all people of any political stripe, but the most extreme voices hold outsized power, because if they can be loud enough that their ideas are actually considered, the other people within their political grouping are unlikely to abandon them, because they need to maintain a coalition. And we're already so polarized that to abandon this means to go to the other side. And most people on either side can't fathom doing that. It's and you sort of mentioned offhandedly, you know, some people will defend their you know, the people who make their media. And sometimes it's so weird to me. Sometimes not even the artists. I will never understand people who defend executives and defend corporations.
Like Elon Musk.
Oh God. I will never understand that. I will never understand the need to defend a billionaire. They won. The fact that they're a billionaire means they won already. But maybe that's part of the thing, because there's that mystique. You want to root for the winner. And to be really crass about it, it kind of turns Elon Musk stands into, you know, Yankees fans always bragging about how good their team is, when of course your team's good. You spend more money on players than any other team in the league. So yeah, you have a good team. Good for you. You have money. So it's not sure why I made that comparison. I don't even follow sports. But there's also this, there's become a general need for a lot of people to sort the world into the good people and the bad people. And obviously everyone by default assumes that they are one of the good people. And therefore they are very quick to defend anyone who aligns with them, especially on a topic where other people are attacking them. So, you know, I don't know the numbers on this, but I'd be pretty confident in saying the majority of Elon Musk stands are cishet white guys again, because aside from the money, they would actually share a lot in common with Elon Musk. And if he is bad, and especially if he's bad for any reason other than the fact that he's rich, what does that possibly mean about them? And this kind of trickles all the way down, where, you know, there's a reason we have the phrase, there is no ethical consumption under capitalism, because it's true. It's depressing, but it's true. And to realize the reality that, you know, these CEOs are strip mining companies and firing employees and making people crunch these horrible hours and removing consumer protections. But if they still make a product that you like, it makes you feel like a bad person to acknowledge how horrible that company is and then still consume the product. And some people will choose to not consume the product. Some people will do the best they can to grapple with that dissonance. That's usually where I end up. And some people will simply refuse to engage with the idea that there's anything wrong. They would rather not think about it. Again, that privilege to not have to think about it.
Yeah. I often grapple with this with buying off of Amazon.
I try to not as much as I can, but
yeah,
often I have, especially where I live, because there's like, we used to have a JCPenney. It got closed because JCPenney closed down every location where they didn't own the building.
Mm-hmm.
So like we have a nearly derelict mall near where I live. And one of the last things that was in it was the JCPenney. But they closed it down because JCPenney didn't own the mall. Somebody else did. And now, like, I can't get clothes without driving an hour from where I live. So, like, those are my options. I can drive half an hour to 45 minutes away to find a TJ Maxx or a Walmart or something that's kind of a crap selection of shit. Pardon me, I don't know. I didn't ask if I could swear.
Oh, that's fine. You can.
Okay, good. It's going to have a crap selection of shit that I may not like, and even if I do, might not fit me. Or I can go on Amazon and actually find something and have it sent to me. So and the thing is, even going to like any of these other places that I've mentioned, like that's not great either. So, you know, it's pick your poison. It's all a mess. We have a society built around convenience, but convenience comes at a very high price that I think a lot of us are finally starting to properly see what that price is. But we've now had the convenience for so long that the alternatives we had before have fallen away. And so now all we have is the destructive, convenient option.
I think part of that is like, part of solving that problem would be to like restructure a lot of these kinds of, I guess, how society is built at this point, because it does seem like it's crumbling, with the infrastructure and police not knowing how to like go into a situation, even though they have 400 people there. Like I think we need a serious look into like how we restructure our society that seems to be crumbling all around us. Like, some people have given ideas of how to do that, by like what you said, pulling out some of the budget of the police and putting it into those social services that would really help people, who are like non-violent and stuff like that. Like, they don't need the police there. They just need like a little bit of psychological help. And, you know, that's
so like there's a lot. See, the problem is we're in a position now where there's a lot of stuff that is in place that either just flat out ultimately turned out to not work, or if it once worked, it hasn't been kept up. So that's where you get things like infrastructure all over the place. Major California wildfires are starting because power line cables are breaking, not because they're defective, but because they've never been replaced.
Mm-hmm.
And they're at the end of their useful life. It didn't fail because somebody screwed up. It lasted for as long as it was designed to last. It was supposed to have been replaced by now. So, anyways, you know, we have all these things that I was about to make a snarky remark of, you know, this stuff was meant to have been replaced with something new by now, which is kind of how I feel about the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah.
But moving on from that idea, like the thing is, we clutch on to we don't try and fix things until they've already broken, and that's something that is happening across the board. That's happening with infrastructure. That's what's happening with social services. I mean, that's like, just to give a weird example, that is how products going to market are handled in this country. You can bring almost any product to market without having to go through anything that proves that it's safe and or effective at what it's supposed to be. You can still sell it. You'll only have to stop selling it if it is later proven to have caused harm. If you go to somewhere like the EU, you can't put a product on the shelf until you have proven it's not going to hurt anybody. It's preventative. Here, we just let anything go, and only when it's a problem do we stop and do anything about it, which is part of why we're in the climate mess that we're in. Because, climate scientists have been saying for longer than I've been alive that we have to do some drastic stuff, and we have to do it now.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than do any of it, too many of the people in power have said, well, it seems to be okay right now, because they would rather hold on to the idea of, well, maybe these people are wrong and maybe it won't happen, rather than do anything to prevent that now almost inevitable eventuality.
I do want to mention the EU is actually going through a whole bunch of shit. Talk about climate change. Like, it's super hot over there, and they're getting like forest fires that you would usually see in California.
Yeah, I mean that's the other thing. I mean, like it's all screwed.
Yeah,
it's all screwed. Like that. Yeah,
it's hard not to be doomer about it.
It is hard not to be doomer, and I don't mean to be doomer, but I am at a point where, like, I'm not naive enough to think we can fix this. Well, actually, let me back this up. We can fix this, but we won't. So I'm not naive enough to think that we will. That the people actually that we have, for some godforsaken reason, put into power will actually do anything about it before it's too late, assuming it isn't already. That having been said, on principle, I refuse to lay down and just throw my hands up and go, well, that's it. Because I refuse that when some future civilization comes to this planet to do an archaeological dig, I refuse for them to look at the evidence and go, well, they just rolled over and gave up. I want them to go, oh, some people tried. Right up to the end, some people tried. And I refuse to let the people who are wrecking everything feel relaxed and complacent. Yeah. I want them looking over their shoulders. I want them dreading that everything they are trying to and have accomplished will get undone. And I want it to get undone, but at the very least, I want them afraid. I want them knowing that people are in the streets marching, that people are voting against them, that people are doing as much as they possibly can, because I know they hate that. I will run on spite if I have to, because you'd be surprised what you can accomplish on spite.
Just a mention of Gen Z, they're doing some fucking great things right now. Like, all of those climate marches were amazing.
The boomers especially were not prepared for Gen Z.
Yeah.
They were not prepared for a generation that's coming in with literally nothing to lose. Like, they have no reason to uphold any of this, and they have every reason to burn it all to the ground.
Mm-hmm. Because if they don't do something, then it's already gonna burn, so...
Yeah. Like, it's at a point where, like, look, we're already screwed. We might as well go as hard on your nonsense as we possibly can. The boomers were not prepared for what was going to happen when they robbed multiple future generations of wealth and stability. They did not realize the monster that would be wrought of that. And I'm very amused by it.
I feel like I'm amused too. That's a little bit of catharsis on this doomer pile.
Like, I'm kind of reaching the point where George Carlin was when he was still around. You know, he used to say, I cherish and love individuals as I meet them. I loathe the groups that they are members of and associate with. I'm a personal optimist and a cynic about all else. basically saying, I love individual people, but I hate the human species.
That is
Like,
completely fair at this point.
I feel you, dude.
So let's move on to a lighter point. Let's talk about, we could do the MCU, or we could, do Thor.
I mean, those are kind of nested topics.
Yeah.
We could start with Thor because I seem to have been one of the few online personalities who really liked Thor: Love and Thunder.
Yeah.
Which was weird.
Like, let's not get into too many spoilers. I actually haven't seen it, but I have like some thoughts on it.
I can avoid spoilers easily enough.
Sure.
But like the simple thing was I don't watch other or read other people's reviews before I watch something I know I'm going to do a review video on. And I hadn't for that, but I did still pick up the general atmosphere of, let's go with lukewarm. Like, lots of people were going, it's not that good. A lot of people were going, it's not as good as Ragnarok. Some people were going, this is the worst Thor movie. Some people were going, this is terrible. And I'd been marinating in that before I went and saw it. Then I went and saw it, and I'm sitting there basically the whole runtime thinking, when does it get terrible? Because this is pretty good. And that's the feeling I had all the way up to the end credits. I'm like, when was that? What point was it supposed to become terrible? And I actually, I still ask that. Because, I've had conversations with some people where, they just don't like how jokey the tone was. And I'm like, that's fair. Personal taste, I get it. But if you liked Ragnarok, I don't know. I can't think of what is the breaking point. Especially given that, the ending is so good. The climax and the ending are really good in that. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I don't get it.
Yeah. So have you read the comics that it's based on?
I have read some of them. I have not read anything with Gore the God Butcher. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I know of him. But I haven't read that stuff. I did read the first volume of The Mighty Thor, where Jane Foster picks up the hammer. And I'll do a side plug. Another podcast that I do called Tough Like a Girl on the Fire and Water Podcast Network. I do that with my partner, and we review trade collections and graphic novels with female protagonists. And we did the first volume of that. Oh. I enjoyed it. Enjoyed it for the most part. Most of the nitpicks I had are my standard modern day superhero storytelling nitpicks.
Yeah.
But I thought it was fun.
How well do you think this Thor movie had adapted those comics?
It's hard to say because I only read the one volume.
Right.
It's doing what a lot of the Marvel, because the thing is, I feel like with the Marvel movies, it's kind of inaccurate to even ask how well did they adapt the comics. You can ask how well did they adapt the characters.
True, yeah.
But they tend to do their own thing with the plot lines, and thank goodness, because Captain America Civil War is awesome, and the Civil War event of the comics was garbage. So, thank goodness they do it the way they do it. But I would say that might be where some of the concerns about a jokier tone come in, because so here's the thing. There is humor in the Mighty Thor, but it's comes from a different angle. Mm-hmm. The humor in the Mighty Thor, the comic, largely has to do with, honestly, how much how do I want to put this? How much she kind of channels 1960s Thor, with how formal and flowery the speech is, and the sort of gung-ho, what, huzzah, have at you, wicked villain kind of thing.
Right.
Which is funny in its own way. But instead, this goes for a more rom-com thing. So it's a different style of humor than was in that original. I think if anyone who likes the Jane Foster as Thor run in Marvel, I could see where they would feel this isn't a particularly faithful representation of what was done in the comics. While I enjoyed it, I wasn't invested enough in that to really have it be a factor for me in going to see it. I mean, like at this point, especially with the characters who've been around for like third and fourth installments, these movies are much more about being sequels to their own things than about being adaptations of the comics anymore. They're kind of self-sustaining. So,
yeah,
this Jane Foster is going to be in line with the version of Jane Foster from the first Thor way more than it was ever going to be in line with the comic books.
So it's taking inspiration from the comics rather than just adapting them.
Yeah, I mean, by and large, the Marvel movies have taken core ideas or sometimes only just names of storylines. Like, they had a whole thing in the third Iron Man with Extremis. That's a completely different plot. They use the name Age of Ultron. That's not even close to the same plot as what was in the comics. They aren't afraid to just take something that sounded good or like was one good thing and like, we'll just take that bit. So like for Civil War, like we'll draw a line, Cap and his crew on one side, Tony and his crew on the other. Awesome, keep that. What about the rest of it? No, none of the rest of it. The rest of it was bad. But as a core concept, you can build something good out of that. And actually, that's a way I kind of like adaptation. Because like in my mind, I'm not going to say it never works. Sometimes it can be great, but I find it much more interesting to take a kernel of something from a source material and then build something new out of it than I find a super faithful adaptation. Super faithful adaptations can be very good. Like there are the high water marks, Lord of the Rings trilogy, for example. They're certainly out there, but by and large, they kind of bore me. Or at the very least, if I'm familiar with the source material, they bore me because I'm like, okay, so it's a super faithful adaptation of this book, but I already read the book, and this is just the same thing. Why am I supposed to be excited by this?
Mm-hmm.
Which is not a typical perspective. I know that. This is part of why I am not actually, like, I'm hopeful. I'll still watch it, but I'm not actually super pumped for the Sandman adaptation to Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
I know they've changed some things, but I'm like, if this, especially at this point, because they've already got the Audible audio drama adaptations, which are also super loyal. So I'm like, you better do something different with this, because this would now be the second super loyal adaptation, and I love Sandman. Don't get me wrong, but I'm like, I also own it. I've got it on a shelf. I want that story. I can read that story. Can you give me something else? Just a little bit of something else.
So I guess I had different expectations, and I don't even know at this point why, but I guess I may know kind of why, because I haven't read the comics, but I looked at a lot of what like, those YouTubers who basically spell out what these stories are. Like Comics Explained, and I think it's Variant Comics or something like that. I forgot what that one's.
I'm not super familiar with them, but I know like Casually Comics, Comic Drake. Like, right, I know some of them. Yeah.
I usually listen to their like telling of the story, and I think Mighty Thor and the one Gore the God Butcher is in, like, were really cool to me. So like, I guess maybe for some people it was really like high expectations for adapting this specific story. And like for me, I guess I got caught in that trap of like expecting something that was a little more I guess dreary, like I guess the Gore the God Butcher story would be. And like, hearing from everyone that it was like more of a jokey, like lighthearted type of thing. Like, I guess that's what led me to not being as excited when reviews started coming out.
Hmm. I get that, and like that's also valid.
Mm-hmm.
So like even though like I just espoused, the taking the kernel of something, doing something different with it, there is still, being true to the heart of it. So like my favorite book series of all time is the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which exists in many forms. There's novels, there was a TV series, there were the radio plays, and then there's the movie. And oh boy, did the movie like not understand the heart of that series at all. So like I get that frustration, but at the same time, while I think that's valid, I can't imagine that actually accounts for the majority of disappointed people, because if we can be realistic for a moment, a comic book issue that sells amazingly these days sells maybe 200,000 copies.
Wow.
Like, despite how loud, and I'm not going to say that the comic book fans are unimportant, like keeping them happy was part of the foundational building blocks of the MCU. And generally keeping your fans of the source material happy is a general good thing to do, because if the people who like the original don't like this adaptation, then people who don't know the original are going to look down and go, oh, the people who like this don't even think this is good. Why am I going to bother? So, like, it's not like the fans don't matter, but, like, just numbers-wise, it can't be that high a percentage of the people who went to see it who had actually read the original comics. So, while I'm sure that for some people that is the cause, and it's certainly valid if it is, that's probably a decent percentage of the people talking about it online. But that's another thing that like people in my line of work need to remember. What we do and what we talk about is very niche. And the majority of people who actually go into the movie theater to see these things don't have any freaking clue about any of this that, we soak in and know about and talk about. They don't know what we know. They don't care. They don't know who I am. So, it's very easy when you sort of marinate in geek culture to think that geek culture is reflective of the mainstream. And as mainstream as geek culture has gotten, the vast majority of people in the mainstream who go to geeky things don't care about the geeky source material.
Yeah.
They just don't.
That makes sense, yeah.
But the people who talk about it very loudly online, such as myself, we do care about it. And so, like, if you exist in online fan spaces, people like me, our voices carry a disproportionate amount of authority almost. It sounds like I'm undermining what I do for a living, but at the end of the day, I give my opinions, people give their opinions, they may differ, but like your average person, the people who actually make this theaters sell out, yeah, they don't care about any of this.
Yeah. Yeah, I think my mind actually recently started changing on it, because and this might be something towards like reviewers and stuff like that in general. Basically, after a while, after all the negative reviews had died down, I started seeing more people pop up and say, like, I was expecting to go into this movie hating it, and wound up not understanding what people were complaining about. I think that is kind of an issue that we have with like expecting one thing from movies. Especially like the state of Marvel as a whole, just like they usually have a jokey tone at this point. Like
Yeah.
we know this by now, so like people going into a movie like Thor Love and Thunder, I don't know, I guess we should be like uh moving towards like thinking about how they've been making these movies overall.
Yeah, like especially anyone who saw Ragnarok. Like here's the thing, I would understand anyone who liked the previous two Thor movies and then didn't like Thor Ragnarok because they thought it was jokey.
Hmm.
I don't agree because Thor the Dark World was such a freaking boring slog. But that I could at least understand. But anyone who liked Ragnarok who's going, this is too jokey, I'm kind of like tilting my head. And I'm not gonna say that's impossible, because sometimes like the balance isn't what you wanted. Like maybe Ragnarok was as jokey as you were prepared to go, and maybe it overstepped. So like that can still happen. But like I kind of need an explanation from anyone who said Ragnarok was good and said that this isn't. I'm like, why? And honestly, I have admittedly somewhat nitpicky, but I have a couple of issues with Ragnarok that I've never been able to let go. So I think I actually like Love and Thunder more at this point.
What is that?
So this is gonna be weird because I don't personally super care about these characters, but I just hate that this was done. It really pisses me off how casually the Warriors 3 were killed off.
Oh.
On principle, that pisses me off because, they were in the previous two movies. My issue isn't that their parts were cut down. My issue was that they were killed off, one of them with no lines. Damn. And I'm just thinking of the fact that, like, there's somebody out there, there's some kid out there who came into this movie, is like, I like all these guys. I like the funny fat one with the big beard. And then just watch that person get stabbed and gutted with no ceremony and no acknowledgement and no mourning. And that's kind of fucked up.
Yeah. Like
it ticks me out. And like it's not unique to that movie. It's the same, well, one of the many problems that I have with X-Men The Last Stand, with how casually Cyclops is killed off. Granted, there was a logistical thing there. They didn't have James Marsden for much shooting time, but like the end result, how casually he was killed off and how quickly the plot moves past the fact that this character who was in the last two movies is now dead, that irritated the ever-loving heck out of me. And there was another example that I thought of and now I've lost it, but it's like this casual disregard for like, well, here was an element from the older things that I didn't like, so I'll just kill it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why? Are you going to milk story moments out of that? Are you gonna? No, I just don't like it, so I'll kill it. Screw you, dude. What the hell?
Yeah, I feel like something like that happened in what was it? Doctor Strange 2? Like that kind of hurt me. The way they treated some of those characters in that. I'm
assuming you're talking about the Illuminati.
Yes.
I'm a little mixed on that. That's kind of in the same ballpark. I'm a little more mixed because like
they weren't well established beforehand.
They are kind of presented as one-time characters, but for anyone who knows them from the comics, who now sees them for the first time and like, I'm so excited these characters are finally on screen. Oh crap, not only are they dead, they are dead in horrifying ways. Yeah, it's a little messed up.
And I don't understand why Captain Marvel would die to a statue falling on her when she's supposed to have super strength.
There's a lot. I like that movie less and less the more I think about it.
Yeah, I do too. The thing I absolutely hate about it is just Wanda being butchered as a character, because like she was one of my favorites in like the Marvel franchise. And from WandaVision, like she gets all this build up, like her character feels guilty for hurting these people, and then we don't see her, like I think from one of your videos you said we don't see her go into turning evil at all.
No,
And
it's just taken as a given as we go in. Like
yeah,
at the end of WandaVision, she has the Darkhold. So we start in her next appearance, and now she's evil, and we blame it on this book. But like you blame it on the writers. Like that's another thing that will tick me off is people are like, well, no, she didn't just turn evil. It's because of this book. Like the book is a writing contrivance to justify what the people behind the movie already wanted to do. They wanted Wanda to be evil, and they brought in the evil book. They brought in the Necronomicon to facilitate the thing they already wanted to do. It's one of those things that it's funny. You get into arguments sometimes with geeks, and I'll get into arguments with people who try and use in universe explanations to counteract my problem with like narrative structure and meta issues. So like a solid example for something like that is Man of Steel. I don't have as big a problem with it as a lot of people do, but I do have a problem with Superman killing somebody.
mm-hmm.
Like knowingly, because honestly, he killed a lot of people in collateral damage, but that's a separate conversation.
Yeah.
But I have a problem with Superman making the decision to kill somebody. And you'll have people argue with you like, well, he had no choice because of the circumstances, and Zod was going to kill these people, and he made the right choice. I'm like, that circumstance was not real. That was a situation created because the writers already decided they wanted Superman to kill somebody, so that's the situation they created to facilitate it. Or just in general, when I complain about like something about a character irritating me or annoying me, or a character just doing something that I find uninteresting or infuriating to watch or whatever, and then people will be like, oh, but the reason they did it was XYZ, and like, no, my problem is not that it isn't explained why they did it. My problem is what the makers decided to have them do. I don't care about the logistics.
Yeah, I think it's more about the integrity of the character. Like, you have to make it believable as to why they would do this thing against their very nature that is established beforehand.
Yeah. And like what you run into is you run into a lot of reverse engineering writing with something like the Superman example, or with Wanda. Like, well, we want her to be the villain. Okay, but that's a bit of a leap. So how do we do that? Give her an evil book. We'll say it corrupted her.
They literally, in WandaVision, at the very end, the secret scene, she had a reason to be evil and threw it away. Like, her kids were basically yelling for help, and they absolutely could have tied that in. And it just bothers me that they didn't. They just threw it away.
Well, I mean, that's a point where there's just a not proper communication, because like when you have the secret scene in WandaVision be like she hears her boys calling for help, and then you start WandaVision and she doesn't think her boys are in danger. She's just fully planning to kidnap children from another dimension, and is well aware that that's what she's doing. Aside from the fact that it fundamentally fails to understand what grief is. When someone loses a child, they don't just want a child, they want their child back. And even if she were to get them, they wouldn't be her boys. And most parents would understand that.
Yeah.
It's like, this is a massive oversimplification, but it's like, when a small child like loses their favorite toy or whatever, you're like, well, we'll get you a new one. No, but I want mine. I'm like, yeah, because it's not the same. You don't just plug in a new kid. Jesus.
Yeah, definitely. I have so many problems. Like, I feel like the MCU isn't. It started out good with like the TV shows. Like, they've been doing really well on those. And then I don't think the movies are hitting the same notes.
See, I'm not loving a lot of the Disney Plus stuff right now.
I will say that I haven't seen some of the more recent ones. I've seen WandaVision, and I've seen what was the other one? Falcon and
So
the Winter Soldier.
there's been Falcon and the Winter Soldier,
Right.
WandaVision, Loki, What
I've seen
If,
Loki. And I've seen
Hawkeye.
most of What If. And Hawkeye is where I stopped.
Yeah. And then Ms. Marvel and Moon Knight.
Yeah.
So I've had issues with most of them to some degree.
Really?
WandaVision, like, I hate the last 2 episodes.
Really?
Well, yeah. Because it introduces a villain. Why? The villain was Wanda's poor coping mechanisms for her grief. Why is there suddenly an outside force who didn't even create the situation, who just showed up out of nowhere so that we can have a wizard duel in the sky? Why is this here?
Because we need another series.
Well, the spinoff was for her was determined later based off how mimetic she ended up being. It's
That's
not
fair.
even that. No, it's because they needed someone to introduce the Darkhold so she could be a villain in Multiverse of Madness.
True.
But taken as a self-contained piece, what the hell is Agatha doing in this story? What does she add? What does she contribute? How does she function within the themes? She doesn't even work as a dark reflection of Wanda because their motivations are not comparable for what they do. She has absolutely no reason for being there. So, like, I didn't like that. Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I liked, but its handling of its villains was not. It had some iffy issues. I really loved what they did with U.S. Agent, though.
Yes, I like that too, actually.
I thought that was great, and actually, I think it was fantastic that he does not see proper sort of penalty for what he did either, because that's kind of the point of this guy, that he thinks he's just entitled to win, and you're supposed to be pissed at the fact that he seems to have just gotten away with it, and I was, and that was good.
Yeah.
But some of the stuff with the Flag Smashers was a little
Yeah.
But
Oh,
so
yeah.
there was that. There was Loki. I think Loki's the one I probably like the best. What If I lost interest in pretty quickly when I realized how bog standard these alternate things were. Like they're just, most of them are not very creative. They're really, really basic.
Yeah.
Plus, I really hate Marvel Zombies. I really do. I hate it. I hate the concept, and I hate the execution even more. Not even the What If episode, the comics. I freaking hate them. But so there was that. Hawkeye was fine. It was fun. It was enjoyable enough. But that's kind of where I'm topping out with Marvel these days. Moon Knight was really interesting until it had a super rushed final episode.
Yeah.
It really needed at least another 2 episodes. And Ms. Marvel had a really rushed and clunky middle. Probably needed, again, at least another 2 episodes. Gotcha. I'm hoping She-Hulk is good because I love the run of the comics they're basing this on.
Mm-hmm.
So, fingers crossed for that. But Marvel, it's Marvel's in a tough position because they brought things to what was just a flat out climax with Endgame. And it's not to say you can't keep going after that, but when you reach that kind of peak, whatever you do immediately after is almost always a little bit of a letdown. If for no other reason than you have to build up to that level again.
Right.
You can't just stay there, because if you when you have slowly built to cranking it up to 11 in a satisfying way, you can't just stay there, because then you might as well just stay at 5. Like, if it never wavers, what's the point? So, like, they had to bring it back down, but then you notice that, well, we're not up at 11 anymore. And this isn't a problem unique to Marvel or the MCU. Like, you look at almost any long-running TV series, and it's so common for one of the least enjoyed seasons to come on the heels of one of the most enjoyed. Off the top of my head, I wish I could have thought of a different example, but it's what came into my mind. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, season 3 was a really strong season, and it was a very natural climax for the show as a whole because it had her graduating high school, and the whole show had been set at high school up to that point. And then season 4 is not very well regarded because they're trying to find their footing again, being like, well, we kind of climaxed and yet we're still here. Well, we got to do something. And like Marvel, I think, has more of a plan than that, but it's kind of an inherent thing when you peak. Yeah, there's a dip after that. That's just kind of what happens, and we're in the dip right now.
That makes sense.
At least from my perspective.
Well, I could talk about this all day, but yeah, I really appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely. I was happy to do it.
Yeah, I enjoyed our conversation. It was great. Yeah, go ahead and plug yourself on whatever.
Okay, folks, get out a pen and a pencil because they're a pen and a pencil. What are you going to do? Write on the pencil with the pen? A pen and paper, because there's a lot of stuff. Okay, here we go. Council of Geeks is the main thing. Council of Geeks on Patreon is what pays my bills and keeps everything else that I'm about to tell you about up and running and allows me to do all this stuff as my living. Council of Geeks on YouTube is my premier work. New videos every single Saturday. This is my most polished work and my most fully formed thoughts. If you want stuff that is more off the cuff with review material, you can find Break Room of Geeks. That's also on YouTube. Additionally, you can find Vera Wild on YouTube. Wild is spelled W-Y-L-D-E because I had to do it all pretentious-like. You can also find Council of Geeks on Twitter and Instagram. Vera Wild is also on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. I am on Twitch. I stream video games under Council of Geeks on Twitch on Wednesdays and Fridays most weeks, unless something else has come up and is going on. I have 2 podcasts that I do. There is the Council of Geeks podcast, currently playing home to the Jumpgate podcast, which I mentioned before. I'm doing with Jesse Gender, going through Babylon 5. And then there is the aforementioned Tough Like a Girl podcast. That's on the Fire and Water Podcast Network. I do that one with my partner, Liz. I also have books available. I have a fantasy novel, Dreams of Fire, published with Nathaniel Wayne listed as the author. And that is available on Amazon, but if you don't feel like lining Jeff Bezos' pockets, it is also available through Ingram. If you don't know what that means, it doesn't matter. What it means is that the book can be acquired by your local bookstore or your local library. And I also have 2 works published under Vera Wild. One is Skirting Gender, which is a combination advice book and autobiography about being gender fluid. And I also have a 2-act play called When She Wakes, which should not be purchased by anyone under the age of 18. And I think that about does it.
Okay. Yeah. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me.